Hello, James. It's really lovely to speak to you. James Jowi from the East African community at the moment, but you're in Kenya. You're working in Tanzania, and it's really nice to see you again after some time.
Yeah. Yes. How are you, Elspeth?
Yeah, it's good.
James Otieno Jowi, as you have said, and I work at the East African Community Secretariat in Arusha, Tanzania. And as a beginning point, the East African Community is an intergovernmental agency of 6 countries in East Africa, which have come together to form a common regional area through which they can trade and facilitate mobility of people, share resources. And the countries involved are Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, Rwanda, and Burundi. And my responsibility is to head the education department. And under education, we mainly foster collaborations between the 6 countries on educational issues. And in the treaty of the community, the 6 countries have decided to come together and cooperate in education, training, and human resource development, especially where there are capacity deficits. And my role is therefore to facilitate these collaborations in education through the development of relevant policies and frameworks that can facilitate closer engagements and development of capacities, including in research for these countries.
Yeah, and I think you said it's covering all aspects of education. Your role.
Yes, it does. It does. So within education, the main undertakings that we engage with in these 6 countries is harmonization of the education systems of these countries. And this is actually a semblance of the Bologna process that has gone on in the EU. And in this case, we harmonize the education systems to allow for mobility of both students and staff, because the 6 countries have created a common market, and this common market should facilitate the free movement of people, the free movement of goods, and the free movement of capital. So we have to harmonize the systems to enable comparability, comparable quality, and also mutual recognition of qualifications attained in the different partner states. So in that harmonization, regional quality assurance is important.
Yeah.
We have a strong focus now on technical and vocational education to enable the exploitation and utilization of the natural resources of the community and for industrial development of the region. We call it a community, the community of these 6 countries. And we also have a lot of work going on the excluded parts of the society, the marginalized and excluded parts of the society, so that we have everybody coming on board. In addition to the quality reforms, inclusivity, TVET, we also work on centers of excellence where we develop dedicated centers where we can develop capacity in areas where the region has deficits. So we can have a center in Kenya dedicated to a certain discipline, another one in Tanzania on a certain discipline, and the 6 countries now put all their resources together in that center, and they use it for developing capacity. Within the same, we have now frameworks for facilitating movement of people, movement of students, movement of academic staff, and facilitating movement of different professionals. So part of what I do in that is actually to bring the different professional regulatory agencies together to develop what we call the mutual recognition agreements to enable the recognition of the different professional qualifications attained in the different countries to enable labor to move in these countries, especially in areas where there is dire need.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a massive job, obviously, that you've got in particular in regard to education, because clearly that's an important part of it. But it's interesting to see that kind of model being used in that area. But I know that we've known each other for quite some time, and I know it's always been around the question of internationalisation. So if we could just move to, not necessarily within just the East African community, but your knowledge of various countries in Africa, and I wanted to talk about internationalisation there and your view on how you think it's progressing. And in particular, I think one of the questions is whether African countries are really adopting their own approach to internationalisation, or whether they are following a kind of Anglo-Western model. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I'll begin from the East African Community region where I'm based, and within the work that I currently do, then I'll move and look at what developments are taking place in the rest of the continent. And the East African Community, for example, has now declared the region a common higher education space. Being a common higher education space now allows for mobility, allows for comparability of qualifications, allows for development of common benchmarks, and this has been very, very useful in fostering internationalization and largely the movement of students and academic staff within the region. So in East Africa, we now have scholarship programs. These are, and this is to respond to your question about new developments. We now have policies and frameworks to facilitate movement of students within the region. We now have programs and funded opportunities for staff to move within the region. So a university in Kenya can request a staff from Tanzania to come and be in the university for some time in areas where they have deficits. So we see certain trends which were not there before. And in my previous statements, I mentioned about the centers of excellence. These centers of excellence are now major drivers of internationalization in the region, because we have now students from the 6 countries moving to one center of excellence. The teachers also move with them. And these centers of excellence are also required to gain international accreditation so that they really become true to the word of. So that requires them to collaborate with other institutions beyond Africa. And also now there is the trend to start developing international accreditation mechanisms within the continent itself. So there is a lot of movement going on towards that. Then the other aspect is the regional quality assurance. Okay. There have been moves now and a lot of developments in regional quality assurance, developing frameworks for that. Yesterday, I was attending a virtual meeting on the qualification frameworks from the different African countries. They have developed, most countries now have qualifications frameworks, and now we are harmonizing them such that in the East African region, we have a common regional benchmark or framework within which the different countries can situate their own qualifications framework. So there is a lot going on. Another trend that can be for East Africa, but also for the rest of the continent, is the rapid developments in ICT. Mm-hmm. And if at all I take that with the current situation of the COVID-19, there has been a very complete shift. There has been a rush to online learning, a very big rush to doing these virtual meetings, which actually was not there before. Mm. The attitude to the virtual meetings, the virtual way of doing things was actually quite low in the continent previously. But now a lot of things, we now do so many of these meetings virtually, we do a lot of conferences virtually, and I think that gives a lot of opportunity to the future of internationalization within the continent and even beyond the continent. We can now engage with counterparts in other parts of the world much more easily than it has been before.
What about, have there been any developments in terms of curriculum then, James? You talked about quality, you've talked about mobility and so on. What about internationalization of the curriculum? Have you seen any examples of that?
Yeah, there has been, and even in the meeting, we had a virtual conference of Annie yesterday, and there was a lot of discussion on internationalization at home, especially also around the COVID situation. Mm. How can we internationalize our curriculum so that the students who do not go abroad also get the international competencies that they can get while they're at home through the curriculum and other extra curricular activities. Though the challenge has been previously, most researches and debates in Africa had been that most of the curricula of African institutions or countries were largely westernized, such that because if at all you look at the reading lists of most courses that we undertake in our universities, 90% of the content, the reading list is Western. So we did a book about 2 years ago on how we could even more Africanize the curriculum curriculum, not to say that Africanization of the curriculum doesn't have the international component. So there is still that debate about to what extent we need to internationalize the curricula, and whether knowledge from Africa also constitutes internationalizing the curriculum.
Absolutely, and I think it's a very interesting point and key for things to move forward. So it's good to hear there's movement in that respect as well. You mentioned there, Annie, the African Network for International Education, I think, and I was going to ask you about that, because I think you've been involved with Annie for quite some time. And I wondered whether you feel that an association like Annie can be useful in taking forward all of these various things you've talked about in terms of internationalization.
I think an organization like Annie is extremely useful. When we started Annie, it was actually as a result of a study that we conducted together with colleagues from other parts of the world, including Jane Knight, who is a big name in internationalization. And there was a very big gap, and that is the gap that Annie has been trying to fill. And this gap is about bringing together experts, practitioners in international education together to undertake discussions on internationalization within the continent, which was not there. Developing capacity for internationalization. You see that the parts of the world that Africa collaborates with, Europe and America and even Latin America, they have developed good capacities, adequate capacities for their international offices, managing projects. And if at all the other part of the world, which is Africa, that is engaging with them, doesn't have that requisite capacity, then we cannot get the best outcomes of these collaborations and efforts in internationalization. So Annie has been undertaking this. And I think Annie has become a forum where practitioners and researchers in Africa get to share their experiences annually, and also through our respective seminars and workshops. I think it has been extremely useful. Maybe we have not done the best that we could have done, but I really think that the gap that Annie and other organizations working on internationalization have to play is still very crucial. We are working with other organizations in this field, like AISA in South Africa, and we have a series of activities with them leading to our conference that will be in October this year, and largely to show that there is really a lot to do together. And another point is that when we were starting debates and engagements in internationalization about 10 years ago, it was not on the table by then. But right now, university leaders, universities themselves are focused on internationalization. And this has also been coupled by the implications of the rankings, the need to engage more and more strategically with other institutions in other parts of the world. And together with the International Association of Universities, we have worked with a number of universities in Africa to enable them develop strategies for internationalization that have now even made them realize how important it is even to make meaningful relations with institutions in Africa. Because previously collaborations or internationalization meant relations with Europe and America and not within the continent. So one thing we see increasing is engagements between institutions within the continent, mobility of students. With previously students from African countries like a Kenyan, like a Kenyan would not have wanted to go to, that shows really that I'm in an African rural village, which is quite good for this discussion too. So a Kenyan student wouldn't have wanted to go to university in Nigeria or in Uganda, but now that is quite normal, because the quality is good, the facilitative frameworks are being developed. And I think if at all we take another 10 years, I think Africa will be quite an important frontier and player in internationalization, also noting the rising access, the increasing access to higher education in the region.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear, because it's great to get an update on where things are at the moment. I think your role with Annie now is specifically around research. So I just wanted to ask a final question about research and publication in particular. So one of the problems, I think, in internationalization is that we keep getting articles written in English is one of the issues, because we're trying to make sure that everybody can understand it, so there's a search for a common language. But I think there's a sense that also that we're still not getting sufficient numbers of publications from certain parts of the world. So African countries, Latin America, for example, parts of Central Asia. These are parts of the world where we're not necessarily getting huge numbers. We do obviously get some research and publication, but it doesn't seem to spread as quickly as things that come out of the Anglo-Western world. It's still dominated by that. So again, can I ask you about how we can, or whether you feel there's any progress being made in African authors being published in widely read global publications? Do you think there's progress there as well?
Thank you so much for that question. And from what we've been doing, it's not only restricted to internationalization or higher education. This is an issue on the whole field of knowledge, where Africa still feels to be at the periphery of knowledge. Part of it is because of the low research productivity in the continent, which in the last few years has been really increasing compared to what it was previously, but also related to the structural barriers in accessing the what we call the international journals in the US, in Europe, and most African scholars feel that it's really, really tedious to get through. And part of it could be, it has been historically that maybe the quality of most papers from the region could be, some of them low, but to some it is really just structural barriers.
Yeah.
And again, there is also the issue of dissemination, the knowledge about the existence of these journals, and also be it in academics, be it in internationalization, people know each other. That's the personal touch. So if at all we'll see that, oh, this is a paper from Jowi, already there is a connotation of the quality of the same. And so most scholars from Africa feel actually closed out. And then there have been attempts to try to establish similar journals within the African continent. Then the issue of recognition comes in. If at all we establish a journal of internationalization in Africa, it will not be taken to be like a global journal for internet. It will remain an African one. And so there are still some very historical connotations of what knowledge is and what quality is, which permeates into the journals and how we disseminate knowledge, which still structure how we engage up to today. So there are times when I know the journals where publications on internationalization can be done, we can get access to them, but most cases when we have scholars submitting their papers, they get sometimes stand downs. What we've done as Annie is actually also to get possibilities of special issues. So we've done this with the IAU. We have a special issue of a journal. We have done this 3 times, so that, and that is also a way of getting the Africa's message powerfully out there. So if at all we go for a special issue and we have, this is a special issue on internationalization in Africa, then we get a way of sending out our message in a much more powerful way than if we only had one article in a journal about an aspect of internationalization in Africa.
Well, that's all really fascinating. I'm so glad to speak to you today, James, because we haven't seen each other for a couple of years, I think. So thank you so much for taking the time and going through all of those things. We could talk for hours, but we'll stop there for now. And I look forward to seeing you